Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet passage through history's shadowed corridors. Tonight, we step not into the courts of emperors or the wars of republics, but into the misty twilight of medieval Britain. Here, myth and memory intertwine so tightly that one cannot tell where history ends and legend begins. Our guide for this journey is Geoffrey of Monmouth, a 12th century cleric whose pen reshaped Britain's past and gave birth to legends that still captivate imaginations today. Geoffrey did not merely record history, he invented it, weaving together scraps of truth, folklore, and fantasy into a sweeping tale of kings, battles, and prophecies. Though his work is filled with inventions, it became the foundation of Britain's national myth. And in that act of creation, Geoffrey transformed how people understood not only their past, but also their identity. Geoffrey's most famous work, the Historia Regum Britanniae, or History of the Kings of Britain, was written around 1136. In it, he claimed to recount the story of Britain from its mythical founding by Brutus of Troy down to the 7th century. Of course, much of this was fabrication, but to Geoffrey's readers it felt like truth. His sweeping narrative gave Britain a glorious antiquity, linking its people to the grandeur of Troy and Rome. More than just history, it was a national epic, designed to inspire pride and unity at a time when Britain was fragmented by Norman rule and divided loyalties. In giving his land a legendary past, Geoffrey gave his contemporaries a sense of destiny. He told them, "You are not just subjects of kings, you are heirs of heroes." But Geoffrey did not stop with Brutus. He gave Britain kings who had never existed, battles that had never been fought, and lineages that stretched back into the mists of time. Some of his stories were wild inventions, others borrowed from Welsh and Celtic folklore. He wrote of Lear, whose tragic tale would later inspire Shakespeare. He described fierce wars with Saxons, Picts, and Scots, blending history with legend until they were indistinguishable. In doing so, Geoffrey gave the island a past as grand as that of Rome itself. His chronicle was less about accuracy and more about identity, about giving a scattered people a story that could bind them together. Though scholars soon doubted its truth, the common folk embraced it, and kings and nobles eagerly traced their ancestry back to Geoffrey's imagined heroes. Among Geoffrey's creations, one figure stands above all others, King Arthur. Though Arthur had appeared in earlier Welsh tales, it was Geoffrey who first wove him into a grand narrative of kingship, conquest, and chivalry. Geoffrey's Arthur was no mere warrior. He was a world conqueror, leading armies across Europe, rivaling even Rome. Under Arthur, Britain reached a mythical golden age, a vision of unity and power that haunted the imagination of later generations. It is Geoffrey's Arthur who inspired centuries of retellings, from medieval romances to modern novels. Without Geoffrey of Monmouth, there might never have been Camelot, Excalibur, or the Knights of the Round Table. He gave Britain not just a hero, but a dream of greatness that transcended time and place. Yet Geoffrey's Arthur was more than a tale of glory. In his narrative, Arthur ultimately falls, betrayed from within, undone by the same human flaws that had doomed countless kings before him. Here lies Geoffrey's genius. He did not just invent heroes, he invented tragedies. His stories reflected the cycles of rise and fall, of greatness achieved and greatness lost. They were reminders that even the most powerful rulers are bound by fate, and that history is as much about endings as beginnings. To Geoffrey's medieval audience, living in a world of uncertainty, this mixture of triumph and ruin felt true, even if the details were not. Through legend, he spoke to reality, teaching that identity is forged not only in victories, but also in the struggles and defeats that shape a people's memory.
Geoffrey's Historia spread rapidly across Europe, copied in monasteries and read in noble courts. Its appeal lay in the way it combined entertainment with authority. By writing in Latin, the language of scholarship and the Church, Geoffrey gave his legends the aura of official history. At the same time, the tales themselves were filled with wonder. Giants, sorcerers, betrayals, and battles that captured the imagination of any listener. Scholars argued, but rulers embraced it, for Geoffrey's book gave legitimacy to dynasties. Kings claimed descent from Brutus or Arthur, using legend as proof of divine right. In this way, his pen did more than tell stories. It reshaped politics. A myth, once written with authority, could become more powerful than fact. And Geoffrey understood this better than anyone. Central to Geoffrey's work was Merlin, introduced not just as a prophet, but as a mystical thread connecting the past, present, and future of Britain. Earlier Celtic traditions had spoken of seers and magicians, but Geoffrey brought Merlin into the heart of his narrative. Through Merlin, Geoffrey explained the rise and fall of kings, the coming of disasters, and the inevitability of destiny. Merlin's prophecies lent an air of mystery and authority, as if history itself were guided by hidden forces. Readers were enthralled. They were not just hearing stories, they were glimpsing fate. In weaving Merlin into Britain's history, Geoffrey ensured that his tales were more than entertainment. They became a cosmic drama, with destiny written into the very fabric of the land. But for all its grandeur, Geoffrey's Historia was far from universally accepted. Some scholars denounced it as invention, calling him a liar who corrupted history with fables. William of Newburgh, a contemporary chronicler, accused Geoffrey of filling Britain's history with shameless lies. Yet this criticism only added to his fame. To ordinary readers, the truth of events mattered less than the truth of meaning. The stories explained why Britain was a land of destiny, why it had heroes, and why it mattered in the grand tapestry of nations. Geoffrey may have blurred fact and fiction, but in doing so he revealed a deeper truth, that history is not only about what happened, but about what people believe happened. Belief, after all, shapes identity as much as fact ever could. Geoffrey's influence reached far beyond Britain. In France, his tales fed into the rise of Arthurian romance, where writers like Chrétien de Troyes transformed Arthur's court into the model of medieval chivalry. From there, the legends spread into Germany, Italy, and beyond, inspiring poems, songs, and epics. The story of Britain, once a remote and fragmented land, became part of Europe's shared imagination. Arthur, Merlin, and their companions became symbols not just of Britain, but of ideals, honor, loyalty, betrayal, and destiny. Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing in his quiet monastery, had unleashed a cultural wave that reshaped medieval literature. His work stood at the crossroads of history and myth, bridging the scholarly world of chronicles with the poetic world of romance. What makes Geoffrey fascinating is not only the legends he created, but the questions he left behind. Did he truly believe his own tales, or did he knowingly invent them for effect? Was he a patriot trying to elevate Britain's stature, or simply a storyteller who understood the hunger for myth? His silence on these questions leaves us guessing. Yet perhaps the answer does not matter. What matters is the effect his words had, the way they forged a legendary past that countless generations embraced as their own. Geoffrey blurred the boundary between history and literature, between truth and imagination. In that blurring, he revealed the power of storytelling itself, to give a people a past worth remembering, even if it never truly happened.
Geoffrey's legacy became especially powerful during the later Middle Ages, when monarchs and nobles sought to legitimize their power by claiming descent from the heroes he described. Arthur was no longer just a story, he was a political weapon. Kings presented themselves as heirs to his throne, suggesting that their rule was not just lawful, but divinely destined. The Plantagenets, in particular, embraced Arthurian imagery to strengthen their authority over a divided land. Geoffrey's imagined past became the stage upon which real politics were played, a reminder that history is not only about memory, but also about manipulation. By shaping Britain's story, Geoffrey gave rulers the very tools they needed to shape the present. As Arthurian legend grew, writers began to expand on Geoffrey's foundations, adding romance, magic, and moral lessons. Knights became paragons of chivalry, and Camelot turned into a vision of perfect order and justice. Yet even as later authors reimagined Arthur, Geoffrey's shadow remained. He had provided the bones of the story, the rise of Arthur, his conquests, his betrayal, and his fall. Without those bones, there would have been no flesh for later poets to shape. Geoffrey had not just told a story, he had set in motion a literary tradition that defined the Middle Ages. Even when others called his work false, they could not escape it. He had captured something deeper than accuracy, the longing for a golden age. But Geoffrey's influence was not confined to the Middle Ages. During the Renaissance, as humanists revived classical scholarship, his work came under renewed scrutiny. Scholars condemned his fabrications, yet the legends had already taken on a life of their own. They were too deeply woven into culture to be erased. Shakespeare drew from Geoffrey's tales in creating King Lear, transforming a medieval invention into one of literature's greatest tragedies. In this way, Geoffrey's lies became immortal art. His stories, though untrue in fact, carried truths about ambition, love, betrayal, and the fragility of power. They transcended history and entered the realm of universal themes.
Geoffrey's pen had carved paths that reached far beyond the intentions of one medieval cleric. By the 17th and 18th centuries, skepticism toward Geoffrey hardened. Historians dismissed his work as fiction, a medieval forgery of national history. Yet paradoxically, his legends only grew more romantic. Poets and antiquarians, drawn to the mystery of Arthur and Merlin, revived them as symbols of nostalgia and national pride. In an age of Enlightenment reason, Geoffrey's myths remained stubbornly alive, whispering that human beings need stories as much as they need facts. His critics may have torn down his credibility, but they could not destroy his influence. He had tapped into something deeper than proof. He had touched the human need to belong to a story larger than oneself. Today, Geoffrey of Monmouth is remembered less as a historian and more as a myth-maker, the man who gave Britain its legendary past. His work reminds us that history is not always about accuracy, but about meaning. People long for roots, for heroes, for a golden age to look back upon. Geoffrey provided that, even if he invented it. His writings shaped Britain's cultural identity for centuries, influencing politics, literature, and art. And though scholars may sigh at his fabrications, his achievement is undeniable. He gave the world Arthur, Merlin, Lear, and a vision of Britain as a land of destiny. To read Geoffrey is to walk the line between history and dream, where truth and imagination merge, and where the past is as much created as remembered.
What is most striking about Geoffrey is the way he blurred the line between history and literature. He claimed to be writing history, but his work reads more like an epic poem, filled with drama, wonder, and prophecy. This blending of genres was intentional. In an age when chronicles were often dry lists of kings and battles, Geoffrey offered something different, a living, breathing story. Readers were not just learning about the past, they were being transported into it. His style gave weight to the illusion, making it difficult to separate fact from fiction. And in that difficulty lay his power, the ability to shape memory itself. Through the rhythm of his Latin, Geoffrey turned invention into permanence. Geoffrey's role as a myth-maker raises a profound question. What is the purpose of history? Is it to record facts or to give meaning to a people's journey? Geoffrey seemed to believe the latter. His histories were less about evidence and more about identity. He gave Britain a Trojan origin, heroic monarchs, and a golden king in Arthur. Whether these were real mattered less than the story they told about who the British were meant to be. This is why Geoffrey's work endured despite centuries of criticism. Even when dismissed as false, it remained valuable as myth, and myth is often stronger than fact. His writing reminds us that history, at its core, is a conversation between truth and imagination. The endurance of Geoffrey's stories also speaks to the timeless human hunger for heroes. In times of uncertainty, people turn to figures like Arthur, not because they believe he literally lived, but because he represents something enduring: courage, justice, and unity. Geoffrey's Arthur was larger than life, a mirror of the hopes and fears of his age. but each generation has remade Arthur in its own image, proving the flexibility of Geoffrey's myth. In this way, Geoffrey gave not just one story, but an endless well of stories. His false history became a true legend, precisely because it could be reshaped, retold, and reborn in every age. For modern historians, Geoffrey of Monmouth is a paradox. On one hand, he stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily fiction can masquerade as fact, distorting the record of the past. On the other, he is celebrated as a storyteller whose imagination helped define medieval literature. Both perspectives are true. Geoffrey was neither simply a liar nor merely a poet. He was something in between, a craftsman of memory who knew that history is not only what is written, but what is believed. His work sits at the fragile border where fact dissolves into legend, and legend hardens into cultural truth. In the end, Geoffrey of Monmouth left us not with a reliable record, but something perhaps even more enduring, a sense of wonder. His chronicles remind us that the past is not just a place of dates and names, but a landscape of dreams, fears, and hopes. He gave Britain its legends, and through them, he gave the world a set of stories that continue to inspire books, films, and imaginations today. Geoffrey's pen may have blurred history, but it also created worlds that live on in memory. And so when we speak of Arthur and Merlin, of Lear and prophecies, we're still walking in the shadow of Geoffrey, where history and myth embrace, and where the power of story proves stronger than the passage of time.